A corrupt cop with a fake warrant kicks in a door while a young woman is mid-shower. He thinks he's hunting. He doesn't realize he just walked into bait. Into a room designed like a chessboard by the daughter of the FBI director. And in 3 breaths the predator becomes the exhibit, you know what I mean. The kind you study in a classroom and then meet in the wild. Yeah, that happened. Steam curled off the tiles as Izzy, Grant stilled her heartbeat and let the fear settle into something colder. The way you set a glass on a table and stop the ripple, her sanctuary cracking as the front door slammed, and those heavy boots claimed the floorboards like they owned the deed. That voice with the sandpaper edge barking clear at nobody because he wanted to hear himself command. Let me back up a sec, because this only makes sense if you understand that Izzy wasn't lost. She was waiting, and the only person in that apartment out of their depth was the man who thought a badge was a hunting license. He filled the bathroom doorway like a wall that didn't believe in permits. Detective shield clipped low, suit rumpled the way men wear guilt when they pretend it's weather. Cole Harris, broad. Sleepless, expensive shoe leather and cheap conscience, holding up a warrant that fooled exactly no one with eyes. Izzy gave him the tremble, the towel clutched high. You can't be in here, that tastes like panic to bullies, and he drank it like it was his favorite bar, stepping in, the cigarette ghost of his jacket spreading through the steam. His eyes not bothering to land where decency would ask them to, because men like that test dignity the way pickpockets test pockets. He flashed the paper again and said evidence, cartel, alleyway. Slammed the door on her concern, and what he didn't know, what made him even sloppier, was that she had already texted the building super. And the super had already texted a number Izzy had taped under his desk weeks ago, and a black van 2 blocks away had adjusted its timeline by 4 minutes without breaking stride. Izzy kept her eyes wet and her shoulders small, and let her gaze slip, just enough for a trained predator to think he'd caught the untrained prey, twice toward the old oak chest in the corner. And Cole took the bait as if pride had GPS, tearing blankets, scattering family albums, and then finding, taped to the cedar lining, the tiny black USB drive that felt like a key to an offshore future. His grin said, I win, and he pocketed that little rectangle like it was an annuity, told her to clean up this mess and forget him. Turned back to the splintered door with the bounce of a man who thinks the door is on his side. Izzy stood up in the wreckage and the performance melted off her like the last of the steam. Voice level now, words precise like scalpel cuts, and she told him what he had done wrong, the contaminated evidence sites, the lazy spiral, the assumption that fear equals stupidity. And then she said the quiet part out loud. My father would be disappointed, and Cole froze because instinct finally tapped the brakes. He puffed up once. Your father a mall cop. And when a stranger tells you your secrets without looking at a piece of paper, you either run or you get very still, and he got very still. Who are you? He asked, hand shifting toward his sidearm, because people reach for the last thing that ever made them feel in charge, and she said just a student, which was not untrue. Then picked up the cracked photo of a man in a suit with eyes like hers and traced the split in the glass, and somewhere in his skull the puzzle pieces clicked hard enough to hurt. She told him what was on the USB, not alley footage, not the mirage he chased, but 4K of him taking a bribe in a parking garage, time-stamped, angle clean. Medics checking Izzy while she insisted she was fine, the forensic team floating through with gloves and patient eyes. And Marcus Grant let pride and terror share his face for a long beat before telling his daughter that brilliance and recklessness make a dangerous cocktail and to never pour it without a full team again. And somewhere in that exchange you could hear the future opening. Months later, the headline barely got 3 inches of the evening news crawl. Former Detective Cole Harris sentenced to 18 years on corruption, conspiracy, racketeering. Cartel network dismantled a week after arrest. Coordination credited to evidence obtained in a federal operation. And the quiet satisfaction of that is something you only feel if you watch the first door break and stayed long enough to see the last one close. Izzy finished her degree at the top of the stack because excellence was the way she breathed, then stood on the steps at Quantico with a new badge in her pocket and a sunrise that looked less like light and more like a promise, not a fairy tale ending, but a starting gun. As muscle memory, as the steady refusal to be prey, and the trap that held wasn't made of steel, it was made of mind. Of the kind of patience that lets you act scared while you count to 10 and then pull the thread that brings a rotten house down. Here's the part that sticks. Are we talking about outcomes, methods, or the people willing to carry them out? You tell me. If this story moved you or made you argue with yourself, share your take below. What was right? What was wrong? And what would you demand from the people who hold the shield? Because the conversation after the sirens is the one that decides what kind of community we build next. The first time the package showed up at Quantico, it was small enough to pass as a care box from home. No return address, just a neat label and the weight of something ceramic rattling inside. And when Izzy cracked the tape with her thumb, she found a single shower tile, familiar speckled white with a tiny silver dot drilled into the corner like an eye. Yeah, that happened. And tucked beneath it a Polaroid that shouldn't have existed. A grainy shot of her bathroom ceiling from months ago with a red grease pencil X exactly where the wide-angle lens had lived. Next time we aim lower, scrawled in block letters you could smell the arrogance on. Let me back up a sec, because the sentence they gave Cole Harris didn't end the story, it just turned the page. And the men who'd paid him didn't vanish when the cuffs clicked. They adjusted, they tested fences, they sent gifts to see who flinched first. Izzy held the tile like a coin from the underworld. Breath slow, mind faster, and felt the old sanctuary she'd rebuilt inside herself flex, but not break. You know what I mean. The way a healed bone aches when the weather turns. She logged the package, handed it to evidence, called her father, listened to the silence at the other end that meant he was walking, thinking, counting. Then heard the soft exhale that said he'd found a shelf inside himself to set the fear on. You're pulled from field exposure until we map this. Direct. Absolute. The voice of the director. And she said no before the echo landed because she knew this wasn't about field or classroom anymore. This was about a leak with a pulse and a grudge. Shot groups, so tight instructors raised eyebrows, studied the old case, files the way some people study constellations. And at night the tile's weight haunted her palm until it became a metronome for patience. Weeks passed in that charged quiet, the kind where everyone smiles but shoulders ride a notch higher. And then a small thing knocked the air sideways. Mrs. Patel from 3B, the neighbor with the rosemary and the soft slippers, filed a police report about 2 men loitering on her floor. Maintenance, with no work orders. One of them asking if she missed the student who liked eucalyptus. They were getting cute, which meant they were getting careless. And in that kind of arrogance, Izzy heard opportunity. So she pitched something that made half the room stiffen and the other half lean in. A controlled leak inside a leak. A memo crafted to look like sloppy internal chatter about moving a protected witness who'd flipped on the cartel. Time, route, skeleton crew, nothing that would survive audit. Everything the wrong ears would salivate over. Her father hated it on sight. Of course he did. Theater had already nearly cost him a daughter once. But he didn't become who he is by flinching. He became it by measuring risk against necessity and then owning the call. So he signed the corner of the page with a pen stroke that meant go. And the paper moved where paper always moves. The quiet channels where gossip pretends to be information. 2 days later, a kid from Integrity and Compliance, Jonah Vega, 26. Eyes too honest for DC, bumped into Izzy in the cafeteria and spilled an entire coffee across his own notes. A mess of pen and caffeine that would have been just clumsy if his whisper hadn't been so precise. Your memo's already in places it shouldn't be, he said without looking up. And the person who opened it didn't search it, they printed it, like they were afraid to leave fingerprints inside the system. It should have been nothing. New kid nerves, a crush. A mistake. But Izzy's bones knew cadence, and the cadence of his fear was clean, so she followed the print trail through a stack room where old paper goes to feel important. And there she found the first breadcrumb that smelled like perfume, an assistant U.S. attorney's code stamped faintly along the edge of the page. A woman with a reputation for surgical indictments and photo ops, Lila Brandt, sharp suit, sharper quotes, the kind who pronounces justice like a brand name. Izzy brought it up chain, careful, knowing that pointing at the wrong person in that orbit could scorch your hand. But the more she traced scholarship funds and charities with names like Horizons and Tomorrow and Grace, the more familiar the shapes felt, the same anonymous generosity that had sent Cole's daughter to Georgetown. The same donor pipeline that always seemed to pass through Lila's friends' before landing in tuition offices and safe deposit boxes. You could call it circumstantial if you wanted to sleep at night, or you could call it pattern if you were building a map, and maps were what Izzy built when the air got tight. They set the stage the way you set a snare, ordinary details arranged until ordinary becomes inevitable, a witness transport scheduled at dusk from a federal garage nobody loves. Cameras scrubbed by maintenance to give the leak a sense of edge, a convoy that looked thin from the outside and thick from the inside, decoys with the right hair and the wrong shoes. A bus route detoured so the corner you wanted would feel like an accident. Izzy rode front right in the lead SUV, calm on the outside, inside ticking off variables. And across the street in a courier van wrapped in a local florist logo someone listened to a heartbeat they'd already priced. The handoff was 3 minutes out when her phone buzzed with an unknown number and a text that read like a confession scratched on a wall. Heard you baited the hallway again. Don't go home alone. H. For a second she couldn't place it. Then the prison handbook in her head flipped to the page that mattered, and the letter stood up. Harris, Cole Harris. And that was the twist nobody had ordered. Your monster from part 1 reaching through the bars to warn you about the sequel. She should have deleted it. She should have called it in, but she froze. Not from fear, from the uncanny weight of an enemy's hand trying to pull you back from the same cliff he'd shoved you toward. And in that freeze a black sedan rolled past the garage mouth with the windows up and the lights off and the posture of a decision already made. The first shot came not from the street but from the mezzanine, top down, a clean professional angle that told you who you were dealing with, not neighborhood muscle, not freelance. This was somebody who'd trained where she trained, who knew exactly how teams move when they think they're safe. The convoy flexed, returned fire. Civilians hit the deck like choreography. And Izzy saw, as clear as classroom diagrams, the whole thing wasn't about hitting the witness. It was about flushing the handler. The leak had come to touch the fire. And if you want to know what arrogance smells like, it smells like perfume in a garage. Lila Brandt appeared in the confusion with the best excuse money can memorize. I was nearby. Then came the part nobody put in the training videos. The part where the room clears, and you sit with the smell of burnt coffee and gun oil and the sound of your own breath, and you read the last page on the file, and it says the fake warrant seal Cole Flaw. Shed months ago wasn't printed at a bodega or a cartel office. It was cast using an original die once assigned to a field office procurement chain. A die that should have been destroyed 6 years ago when the marshals updated hardware. A die that went missing and nobody looked hard because missing paper has a way of suggesting paperwork. And paperwork is how rot hides in daylight. Izzy held that printout long enough to leave fingerprints on the letters and understood the thing her father's eyes had been saying even when his mouth stayed careful. This wasn't one bad apple. It was a branch, maybe 2, maybe the whole side of the tree, and if you keep sawing you better have a place to stand when it gives. They made the arrest clean because that's how you honor a process you still believe in. Lila leaving the building in a gray suit that suddenly looked borrowed. Her hands in front because vanity dies last. And on the street, a dozen lenses blinked like insects while headlines sprinted to outrun context. Star prosecutor tied to bribery ring. But then Izzy's phone buzzed again with that same unknown number and 3 words that felt like an ice cube under the tongue. We burned one branch. And she looked up at the building glass where her reflection stood beside the faint outline of her father in the window above. 2 silhouettes layered over a city that never stops humming. And understood the open part of this ending would not be rhetorical. When she finally went home that night, she checked every frame and every seam. Not paranoid, practiced. Then set the Quantico box tile on her kitchen counter and stared at it until the room felt honest again, the way you stare down a dog until it looks away first. She thought about Cole's text, about how monsters sometimes send warnings to feel human again, about how debt in the underworld comes in flavors you can't taste from the surface, and wondered whether saving her life from inside a cage was penance or leverage, whether he'd already traded that message for a favor he'd cash later, and if that's justice or just transactional gravity. She put the tile in a zip bag and wrote the date with a marker and slid it into a drawer labeled Truth. Not because it made the room safer, but because naming your ghosts keeps them from naming you. So here's where we land, at least for now. Act 2 doesn't give you the slow clap finish. It gives you a shot-for-shot replay of the first doorway, only bigger, deeper, more crowded with people who look like us, who talk our talk and cash different checks. Because the argument we have together after the sirens fade is the only thing that keeps the lights honest.